Hey, you've been looking for some information out there in the Google and YouTube world that will educate you on the difference between the lender scores and the monitoring scores that you see? This is it. This is probably the only source you're going to find it. And today we're going to cover 5 key differences between what the lender scores, the FICO Classic, looks at and responds to versus your monitoring scores, the ones you're subscribed to. Even your free apps like Credit Karma and Experian, actually all of them, whether they provide FICO 8 specifically, or they provide the VantageScore 4.0. None of them, provide the FICO Classic scores, unless there's a couple of very small exceptions to that rule, but very small. So big difference between what the FICO Classic looks at, lender scores, versus your monitoring scores. Number one, certain derogatory, the newer FICO models don't even see in their algorithm based on dollar amounts. This is huge because the flat FICO Classic absolutely is calculating that derogatory in its algorithm, whereas the newer monitoring does not. And if that debt is new enough, this could cause a big difference. And depending on whether it's VantageScore or FICO 8, that debt could be under $400 collection or FICO 8 under $100 collection, and it simply does not see it, does not calculate it within its algorithm. Again, could create a giant swing in difference between the two scores, misleading you, thinking you're doing better off than what you actually are, only to be disappointed and surprised once the mortgage lender pulls your credit. Number 2, FICO Classic ages derogatory differently than the monitoring scores. This is so huge because age on all score platforms makes up to 75% of the payment history portion of the credit score, which is almost half of the overall credit score. So this is such a big part of how the algorithm assess your risk that the idea of aging the debt any different than when it actually happens seems ludicrous, but that's actually what happens. FICO Classic, the lender scores, ages collection specifically based on the open date that the collection agency purchased it. Which means the debt could have happened 5 years ago, which means it would have minimal impact on your overall credit score. However, the third-party collection agency purchases it and brings it back to recent. Seen it make a 100-point difference between your monitoring scores and the lender scores. The new monitoring scores and the updated algorithms, the lenders don't use them. They're handcuffed. The government will not okay them. They age the debt properly, or at least in most cases, or the way the algorithm was structured. They corrected the issue. So again, huge difference. That's collections. I'm going to keep this in the second version. This could be a whole nother reason by itself. But when it comes to charged off accounts, a company that still owns the debt can also create another age discrepancy between the FICO Classic lender scores and the collection agencies. It's going to be difficult to articulate on these videos, but you can always call us and we'll make this make sense and how it applies to you specifically. All right, difference number 3. FICO Classic, the lender scores, calculates late payments differently than the monitoring scores. Now, real simply, FICO Classic treats all lates regardless of the dollar amount, regardless of the type, the coding and the negative impact against the credit score is the same. Doesn't matter. It could be a $25 credit card payment. It could be a late mortgage payment. The damage to the coding is the same. Whereas the monitoring scores, that is not the case. They tend to have less weight against the credit score on credit card late payments and other miscellaneous late payments but will weigh heavier on something like a mortgage late. So there's variables depending on the type of late. But again, what does it matter? Because nobody's approving a loan based on these monitoring scores. So very important that you make sure you never go 30 days late. Even on the little stuff, it's going to hurt the same. The score doesn't discern and go, oh, it must have just been an oversight. This guy pays all of his big stuff on time, and he just must have missed this $25 minimum credit card payment. It doesn't think that way. And the algorithm wasn't designed to score that way either. Difference number 4. FICO Classic, the lender scores, ages like we talked about, ages collections based on when did the third party collection purchase it. But there's another little quirk about this algorithm, and it's broken. It wasn't designed this way, and I know this to be true because why would the newer algorithms correct it? But that's when it comes to paid off collections, and even paid off, charged off accounts. The new algorithms will most of the time reward you for paying off an old bad debt in the past, or at best do nothing to the credit score. But FICO Classic will actually penalize you many times for paying off an old bad debt in the past. And if you haven't heard that before, then that's going to seem ridiculous. And it is. But here's why. The coding never changes, but the data last activity does, and the algorithm gets tricked thinking the debt is actually newer than what it is. Why is FICO Classic doing this? It's 21-year-old algorithm. It's the version 2 on Experian 4 and 5. It's one of the original versions that the lender started using 20 plus years ago, and the government has never okayed any of the updated version. But this is so important to know. Difference number 5. Charged off credit cards. This is so huge. We see such a big difference between with our clients between the lender score and the monitoring scores on this one factor alone. Matter of fact, all the factors that I've shared so far, but this is a biggie. All right. When it comes to charged off credit cards, it doesn't matter how long ago that card was charged off. If the company still owns the debt, in other words, they haven't sold it off to a third-party collection agency, they still own it, but the account's been closed, the account has been charged off. FICO Classic will use the balance of that account against your current utilization. The newer algorithms do not do that. All right, so let me explain very quickly. Utilization, which makes up to 1/3 of the overall credit score, looks at card balances versus limits, right? Lower your balances versus your limits, the higher the credit score. So a person could have had a storm in their past, they're doing everything correct going forward, and guess what? They get rewarded on the newer monitoring scores by keeping their balances low, not on the FICO Classic. FICO Classic will take that charged off credit card balance in the past and will average it into their current utilization. So no matter how much or how well you pay your current credit cards and keep your balances down, that debt in the past is still haunting you and averaging into your current utilization. And again, can create a 60 to 100 point swing between the two different scoring models. So important. Hope this blesses you. We'll talk to you on the next one.